everyone. Hi, Dorith. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, thank you. We've interviewed you before, but because we get a lot of new followers, it'd be great if you could sort of reintroduce yourself, and yeah, tell us a bit about your background and then how you got into filmmaking and all of that.
Yeah. First of all, thanks for having me again. Um, I am Dorith Mous. I'm 35 years old. I was born and raised in Amsterdam. I then became a model at a very young age, so I traveled a lot and lived in the States for about 7 years. And there I kind of started to develop a skill set or a hobby list or whatever you may call it. And I started going into photography and made a film there, kind of not knowing that I was actually going to be a filmmaker. And then that kind of brought all my passions together. And I have a big passion for talk about topics that otherwise would be a bit tabooed or stigmatized. And I have a lot of experience in the mental health realm myself. So I thought, why not make a series and destigmatize something that we should all be able to talk about, which is Together Alone, which is why we're now having this conversation.
Great. It's great because you actually answered like two of my questions, which was like kind of what
Okay, let's hang
prompted.
up then.
No, I was like, what prompted the transition from, being sort of, in front of the camera to being behind the camera, if that makes sense. Um, I'm sure if you started modeling really young, that might have had, had a role in it. But then I also wanted to ask about, how mental health is a very prominent topic in your films, and, what made you think of like this Good Together Alone series as the best way to kind of approach this topic and destigmatize mental health?
It all grew very organically. So I could now answer something that, because after the fact, hindsight is 2020, right? Like
Yeah.
after the fact, you always know what you should have done or could have done or why you did something and you figure it out. But that would be a generic answer, and it actually grew very organically. I had a lot of anxiety when I was living in New York. And that didn't only have to do with the fact that it's New York and like busy and like kind of, elbow work and competition and all that, but it was also just the fact that I didn't feel that I was doing what I was meant to do. And so I had this whole internal process of like, what am I doing? Who am I? Like, I'm stuck, like this,
Yeah.
like, and it gave me terrible anxiety. And then not being able to get out of that dragged me into depression, because I started regretting decisions that I had made prior, or, so I was kind of like living in the past and scared for the future at once. And the now was just not there.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a lot of thoughts, some really philosophical and some really scary. And at some point, I even had suicidal thoughts. And then I had a moment in which everything clicked. And I was like, I actually don't want to die. I just don't know how to live.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how to like continue what I'm doing. So what do? I need help, right? And so I started kind of like researching, because I thought, okay, I'm also young, like maybe this is just what it's supposed to be like when you're young, that you question all these things, right? But at the same time, I felt quite alone because I couldn't talk about it with anybody. And so online, I kind of saw that the entire topic, just mental health in general versus physical health, was represented really heavily and dark and yeah, like if you need help, then there must be something really wrong with you, and like, I don't know, I almost felt like I was crazy looking these things up. And then I thought, okay, well, I have nothing really to lose but to just be me and talk about this, because otherwise I'm not going to live my life properly. So I started to kind of reflect my feelings to my surroundings and kind of soundboard, my emotions. And then I found out that, like, I mean, I'd say 100% of what was kind of reflected back was the same. And people were like, oh my God, I feel the same way and I have nobody to talk to. Because these were all successful people that kind of don't want to, they don't want to show their weak side.
Yeah.
And so, long story short, I realized that there's a terrible stigma on mental health, even though most of our physical issues come from our inner processes. We live a very psychosomatic life, I believe, as in, people get all sorts of physical diseases because they don't attend to what's going on in here or in here, So I wanted to make a documentary about that. And then I thought, well, I've never made a film. So like, how would I be able to make a full feature documentary film? And so I started, and I think this is kind of the conclusion of everything that you can be stuck in, whether it's like a writer's block or, some sort of creative blockage. You got to start somewhere, and then at some point it'll roll. And this is what happened with Together Alone. I went to film somebody, and it was supposed to be kind of like to make a teaser so that I could get a producer, and it became an episode. And then I made another episode, and then I made another episode, and here we are. And I think it's, I got to thank all the people that helped me on that journey, because on my own, I'm just a girl who wants to destigmatize something. Yeah. But luckily there was a whole group of people who felt the same way and really, had some experience themselves in the mental health realm, and wanted to help. And now we have a beautiful series.
Yeah. It's first of all, that sounds really tough. What you went through in New York, and it's crazy because when you mentioned that, when you started to speak to other people about, what you were going through, and it sort of resonated with everyone. That's kind of the feeling I got watching the Together Alone series. A lot of the times they would vocalize things that, I had thought about, and, I'd only vocalized to like my sister, or maybe I hadn't really found a way to vocalize it. And it was, one thing I really noticed about the series is all the characters are, uber talented people, very, creative individuals who from the outside looking in, if I were to walk past, let's say, Edwin's, a gallery that had one of Edwin's paintings, or if I would never think that the artist could, struggle with things like that, or even like Karen. And it's very interesting. And maybe this is a question that, could be very useful to our, the filmmakers who watch Argo or whose films are on Argo. But I always wonder, because the story structure of the episodes is very interesting to me. I think it always starts with establishing the characters, and you find out that they're these brilliant people. And then, you kind of like go into how that their craft sort of represents a lot of, what's good and bad within them and what they struggle with. And then you always sort of end on a hopeful note. So I always wondered, watching the episodes, how the structure sort of comes about. Does it, do you come with a very strong sense of, how you're going to structure these episodes, or does it come about more in the interview or in the edits?
No. The answer is no. I always do pre-interviews with my subjects. So I already know quite a lot about them in kind of like a general sense. And then we basically film their everyday, or something that we have spoken about that they want to show about themselves, without it being scripted, because I don't really want to tell people like, oh, so we're going to talk about this. So it's kind of always a surprise what we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
And then you're already together, and it's like an energetic thing where you feel someone out, and then we do the interview. And then in the interview, they'll say something, or they'll say certain things that we then also want to visualize. So then we feel.
The more people start talking about it, the more people start trying to understand and educating themselves about it, the more of a change we will see.
So yes, that is a structure. But as with documentary, which this would fall under categorically, the story starts existing in the edit, because I have no idea what they're going to say. I don't know how open my subjects are going to be. they might say something that surprises me, or and that is a whole story on its own. I also have to say, because we just did 2 more episodes, and it is not always, now looking back over the 6 that we've done, it's actually not always a resolution. I think this really depends on if someone has come full circle.
Yeah.
And I think this really depends on what their issue is.
True.
So if their challenge is depression, and they have had depression, but they came out of it through yoga, through art, through therapy, through whatever the solution is, then there is a solution. But if someone, for example, has a borderline or bipolarity, and they're actually still in it, or still figuring out which type of medication to use, or there's some sort of abuse, whether it be drug or alcohol induced realities that they have, so I can't really, it's not a structure like beginning, middle, end, like a usual narrative, but I think that, and I was actually speaking to someone about this recently, so I've been thinking about it a lot. The one thing that all films have in common is having an antagonist and a protagonist.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, it's the person, the subject, and their issue, which is like the antagonist, right? It's the villain.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking a lot about this over the past week, that we all have that. We all have a certain villain, right? We're all kind of like a two-face. Mm-hmm. It only depends on how much attention you give to one and how much attention you give to other, or how much attention one needs or seeks, you know what I mean, from you. Yeah. And so the structure is kind of based on that, I think, on the on the balance between who they were, who they are, who they want to be, what their job did, what their internal process did, and like how that evolved. And in that, there is always a beginning, middle, and end, because that's life, right? There's always a beginning, middle, and end. So yeah, I think the structure is a very natural one.
Yeah, it definitely feels that way, which is why I wanted to ask it. It's like, how do you create something that feels so natural? And, even with, Edwin's story, like he struggled with depression, and I thought that, it was gonna, it's very unexpected the way things come about, because I think that's what's so powerful about documentary. You can't be as, neat about what the person kind of uses to overcome, the side that you mentioned, that, like the darker side. And I always thought it would be the painting. But then with him, it was sort of a combination of things. It was the painting, it was the kung fu. And I think that's
It's funny, if I may elaborate on that, because you have now given whoever's watching right now 3 examples, and they're all Edwin. So it seems that you identified with Edwin.
Yes.
And the beauty of Together Alone is that everybody identifies with a different one.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's like a really logical one. It'll be like someone who does ballet who then identifies with Karen.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's like the complete opposite. So at the premiere of the first 4, there was a big hurly-burly guy who's like, like 2 meters tall, and like, a dude. And anybody in the constrictive thinking of society would say, oh, that's a real man, like a guy. And I know better because I know him, and he's like very friendly and soft and in touch with his feminine side and everything. And I said, so what did you think? And he was like, oh, and he like almost cried, and he was like, oh, I identify so much with Eilika. And I was like, this is so funny, because Eilika is like this fairy, you would picture her like in the forest, which she is, like you would picture her fitting on a leaf of a tree, and there's this big guy who like identified so much with her. And so this is, I think, the strength of identification. We mistake often that we belong to what we look like or what we do in our jobs, or you know what I mean. but actually what identifies us in someone, or like relates us to one another, is all the human qualities, right?
Yeah,
It's
it's
our
very
it's our
true. Yeah.
fears and our emotions, you know. I mean, yeah, I mean, we fall in love with a person, you know, and
Yeah.
I think that people that fall in love with just a look, that's not love, right? It's like that's just outside.
Yeah.
So that whole internal thing, it's beautiful to hear you like name a couple of examples of the same episode, because it kind of
Yeah.
tells me that that was an episode that you linked with in some way, you know?
Yeah,
It's
I
nice.
really connected with him. It was interesting because watching it, you know, you always think like I think as a woman I would relate more to, like, you know, Karen or another character. But then when Edwin spoke, he sort of found a way to vocalize things that I just had never been able to, you know, vocalize myself. And I'm not a painter. I have very little in common with him. You know, I didn't even grow up. I grew up in the Middle East, so it's very different. But yeah, it's super interesting that, like, I think I even subconsciously keep bringing Edwin up, but it's interesting that you pointed it out, because it's true. I guess I really related to him as a character.
Yeah, which is beautiful.
Well, it's like all thanks to your work. So
Well, you're welcome then.
thanks. I wanted to ask, because I find that it's very interesting how diverse the characters are, across crafts, across backgrounds. And I was wondering how you find, I keep calling them characters, but they're subjects. But I was wondering how you find these stories.
It's all a bit different, but again, it's funny. I'm gonna say it was really organic again. Like all my answers start with, "Oh, it's organic," but I think the project in its format needs that. It needs that integrity of like the authenticity of everyone. Like, so everyone involved, not just the subjects. This is something that I really want to point out, that everyone who's involved came in a very organic and authentic way. There's nobody that I like asked to be part of this project and it's just for their skill or something. It's always something where they feel very involved, and so the passion grows. But it started with me. I had a lot more followers about 5 years ago. I was still modeling, and people were just following me for a different reason, I think. And I was like, okay, the person that I portray on my social media is a person that I do identify with somewhat, but it's a mask, you know, which social media is oftentimes. And I thought to myself, okay, so while I am an insomniac and feeling all these things, nobody knows that. Everybody sees the billboard that I'm on and the magazine that I'm in and the people that I worked with. And they put some sort of status label on me. And I was like, okay, wait, no, I don't want that, because I need people to see that I'm like just as human as everybody else. And so I started opening up on my Instagram and told people about my feelings. And it echoed a lot. Like, I got a lot of direct messages of people saying like, oh, I feel the same way, and like, thank you so much for opening up. And like, you know, it was like really rewarding. And then I think I posted a story or something and said, you know, I would like to talk to people about this on camera. Is there anybody who would want to? And then I went to bed. I was like, yeah, probably nobody's gonna really respond, or maybe people are gonna respond for a sort of like an attention thing, because it's social media. It's a different, you know. And then I woke up and I had like 40 emails, and I was like,
Oh, wow.
Well, if there's 40 people who actually pressed send on an email, that probably means that there's maybe hundreds who wanted to write but didn't, or maybe even thousands. I mean, you know, you don't know. And so I started reading these emails, and it was so humbling that people trusted me with their story as a stranger, you know. And one of them really stood out to me. Her story was really, I don't know, it was a very, very well-rounded, well-written story of a young girl, and it was Karen. And I asked her if I could come to Hanover, where she then lived, and film her. And that's where it all started. And then I had that, and then, you know, I was in Australia and showed that to somebody, and somebody was like, oh, I might know someone. And that became Eilika. That was through a friend. And then through Eilika, we came to a production company, and he said, oh, I think I know someone. And then that became Jackson. And so it was all kind of, I never had to look for anybody.
Yeah.
It wasn't like, oh my God, please, somebody out there, you know. It was the kind of just like thrown at me, which told me how essential it is what we're doing. Because you know, I thought I would be having to beg people to talk about this because it's a difficult topic, and I didn't have to beg anybody. So organic.
Yeah, I guess it's just like vulnerability does attract vulnerability inevitably. Like if anyone just like, if I'm on Instagram and I just see someone being vulnerable, it's in some way, and it's interesting what you mentioned about, you know, the 40 emails you received and all the people who didn't press send, because it kind of like gives me an indication also of like how your brain works with this idea of like duality and like what's present and what's absent, and how to bring what's absent in, you know, sort of like in your films. It's interesting the way you looked at the protagonist, antagonist. It's about, you know, what we see and versus what we don't see, and bringing that together. And with the emails, it's sort of the same thing, because a lot of the time you do come across these things on social media, and then you just think, you know, like people don't know this person who posted about this. They were just posting. They don't care to really see what I have to say. And it's amazing how, you know, like in your case, you're kind of like, even though you said you didn't really look for anyone, you did, I guess. You invited them.
It's interesting that you're pointing out the two values, because obviously, for example, like if you look in a very exact way at the world, like percentages, right? Like statistics need two values. You can't say it's 20% because these are the people that I know that do have something, you know. You need the other value, right? Because otherwise it's, and the relativity of that, I mean, people kind of think, oh my God, 75% of people are such and such, fill in the blank. And I go, yeah, that's 75% of what someone had two values of. But if you would say this and this percentage of the world is gay, for example, I don't really trust the statistics, because there's a lot of people that aren't out of the closet. You know what I mean? So like, and this is the same with mental health. I think sexuality and mental health have a lot in common. Everybody has it. Nobody talks about it, right? There's a big downfall, I think, in not talking about that, which is why I do what I do. But you need both values, right? So it's actually what you're pointing out. Like, okay, I got 40 emails, but how many people are there who didn't email me? Because the people who did email me, they're already in a place where they dare to talk about it. But the people who didn't might feel super alone, you know, and like they're crazy and like they're the only one. And you know, I mean, I keep saying to people how happy I am that I'm, you know, I'm from a family where I could be who I am. I'm from a city where I could be who I am. I was always in an industry where I can be who I am, even though I wasn't always. But you know, that's also, you know, being a teenager and not knowing who you are. But, you know, I've come to a point where I look back and go, gee, I could have been born in a town of 300 people in the middle of somewhere, in a, you know, super Orthodox family, for example, and not been myself, you know? Yeah. And so it's also one of those things where those values, I fill those in by what I had and didn't have, you know what I mean? So I'm like, okay, I was able to talk about it. This means that I have a duty to make other people be able to be safe to talk about it. Yeah. You know, so this is why LGBTQIA to Z whole alphabet, obviously is, you know, it's a community, and it keeps on growing because you want to feel safe to be able who you are. to be who you are, you know? And so, yeah, if you're a drug addict and you go to a clinic to get rid of your addiction, you're not gonna sit in a group of people who've never done drugs and then tell your story to them and be like, oh yeah, so I used to shoot heroin. You? Oh no, I've never done that. It's like, you know, so it's very important to see who hasn't talked about it, so that becomes the it's like the emphasis should be on the people who haven't, because that's the audience.
The people aren't speaking. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And the more I think, like, you know, series like Together Alone, you know, the more episodes you create, the more people, you know, whose stories you tell, I think the more people feel inclined to kind of tell their own stories. I think I grew up in the Middle East, which was a very like hush-hush community. And, you know, growing up, I grew up in Saudi Arabia even, which is like even more oppressive. And and it was, you know, growing up, we consumed a lot of, you know, Western content. And I think that was the reason why things are changing so much now, is I think because of the content we grew up consuming, and the content that's coming out of Saudi now is just, it's amazing. It's so inspiring. It has like, you know, like these mental health, you know, people discuss mental health, but with the added, you know, cultural background that, you know, someone like me maybe will even need. And I don't think that could have come about had we not been exposed to so much content where people felt free to speak. And social media also plays a huge role. And it's just like the world is getting smaller, but in such a beautiful way.
And it's expanding at once. It's becoming smaller, but it's expanding in what we can be, how we can be, you know. I mean, look at the 50s. Look how far we've come, you know. I mean, and I'm saying we because we're both female, but, you know, I mean, there's so many topics that you could unleash so many of these statements on, you know. I mean, there's a whole lot of things that I don't like about how the world is, but I tend to focus on what we can change and what we can establish together, you know. And that's also why it's called Together Alone, because everybody in the end is alone. We're all here on ourselves because we're all the center of the universe, right? Literally, mathematically, we're all actually the center of, you know. But yeah, if we again identify and make it a safe place for each other, then we can at least be together alone, you know.
Alone, exactly.
We don't have to be so alone. We can unify and
You mentioned that you know, you just finished editing or are towards the end of editing 2 more episodes, which is really exciting. And I wanted to know, like, if, you know, how long you're planning to continue the series for. Would you like create, you know, a feature, which is sort of an anthology, or are you like?
Well, you're landing on a very good point, because I think that I could go on with this series until I die, because there's so many different stories. And I think there are a lot of categories that people don't even think about that belong to that. I think that anxiety and depression have gotten more attention over the last couple of years, but something like postpartum, for example, hasn't. And a lot of women have this. And you just touched on the subject, geographical, you know, location is a very important one to me. So, so far, it's not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't make episodes somewhere like Pakistan or Algeria or Korea, which actually is at the center of what I would like to do next, because the reach, or what I was able to do up so far, was obviously very Western, you know. It's Australia, New York, you know, people that actually do their jobs and speak up in the place where they were. So like literally just the location, if we focus on just location, then, you know, speaking about mental health might not be as easy in a country like Morocco. But being an artist, for example, would not be so easy in somewhere else, you know? And so finding both in somebody, because they all, I mean, Together Alone is kind of circling around people that are in a non 9-to-5 realm, so to say. So finding that the both qualities in somebody would probably be hard to find that person, but that person will then represent so many people. And like, think about a country like India, you know, if we would do an episode in India, then you have 1.4 billion people that would be able to identify with that one person.
Yeah.
You know, so a very long answer shortened into one summary.
Yeah.
Yes, I would love to continue. I would love to continue in the same format. I think it's nice that people can watch something in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
We live in a world where attention span is getting shorter and shorter. So
Yeah.
maybe I should make episodes that are 15 seconds.
Okay, great. That's super exciting, honestly. Can't wait to watch the new episodes. I hope we get to have them on Argo. But yeah, thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for speaking to us, to me.
Thank you.
This was great. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm very happy that you're in this so personally too, because that helps.
Yeah.
You know. So thank you. Thank you for your story.
Thanks. See you.
Bye.
Bye.